At least 559 of them are serving life sentences for killing Israelis.
Right.
Another 130 of them are terrorists who were caught inside of Israel after October 7th. There are some very, very dangerous people amongst those that would be released. Releasing them would essentially mean that Israel would pursue them and try to kill them all. And this is something that we don't want to see happen either. We're in a very difficult situation because there is an urgency of getting the hostages home. Women, children, and elderly is apparently what's on the table right now. It has to be a significantly larger number of people that Hamas is willing to release in exchange for a ceasefire that would last 3 or 4 or 5 days. And the entrance of a lot more humanitarian aid into Gaza is something that Israel would for sure allow. But Hamas needs to understand that if it wants this humanitarian aid to get into Gaza, if it wants more water, it wants more fuel and food and medical supplies, it has to concede and at least release the women, the children, and the elderly.
Been in touch, I understand, with officials in Hamas's leadership in Gaza, in Beirut and Doha. How are those conversations progressing? What is the tone of those conversations?
Those conversations today are essentially not happening, and those people that I was talking to in Hamas are not amongst the decision makers with regard to the hostages. So they're rather without value, I would say. The negotiations are taking place at the highest level possible right now in at least 2 capitals, in Doha and in Cairo. They're being headed on the Israeli side by the heads of the Mossad and the heads of the Shin Bet, with a very small inner circle of people in the Israeli war cabinet who know the details of what's going on. All the talk and all the rumors and all the numbers and the conditions that we hear are all part of the negotiations, but not necessarily what's being said behind closed doors in those rooms where the negotiations take place. It's a very difficult situation. And of course, the public wants to know. And the various sides in the negotiations uses these rumors as a means of putting pressure on the governments, both Israel and Hamas, to make decisions.
Mm-hmm. What is it like to then be in the position of trying to negotiate when the public rhetoric perhaps is one thing, even from, Prime Minister Netanyahu saying we are looking to eradicate Hamas and that is objective number one, versus Hamas suggesting that a ceasefire needs to happen before any hostages are released. So when that is the public face of what's going on, but you are kind of behind the scenes actually working the nuance of this for negotiation, how difficult is that?
It's very difficult, but let me put it in a broader context. The negotiations that I worked on took 5 years and 4 months before they produced a result. A proposal for a release of the Israeli soldier at the time in exchange for 1,000 Palestinian prisoners was put on the table 6 months after he was abducted. It took another 5 years before the parties were actually ready to make an agreement. And today we don't have 5 days. 5 years, we have maybe 5 days. And this is the reality on the ground. We're talking about a situation where 3 of the hostages have already been found to be dead. We don't know what the fate of the other hostages are. Hamas claims that they were killed by Israeli bombing. We don't know. Israel, of course, claims that they were murdered by Hamas. When you have 240 hostages, it's very different than holding one Israeli soldier who's very valuable to the people holding him. 240 hostages makes every single hostage expendable. If they're too much trouble to hold, if the logistics are too complex. They have babies, they have elderly people who need medication, they have people who were wounded in the attack on Israel on October 7th. It might be difficult for them to deal with so many people, particularly when Israel is, as you said, fighting a war to dismantle Hamas's ability to ever exist again.
It's amazing what you say there about the length of time taken in the negotiation in which you were involved around the soldier Gilad Shalit, which, as you say, the proposal was on the table after 6 months, and that was a sort of prisoner exchange, wasn't it? So 1,000 Palestinians, as you say, was the kind of price, if you like. But it's notable, isn't it, to consider who those prisoners were? Because our reporter was telling us earlier that one of those is the man who went on to lead Hamas and indeed was behind the October the 7th attacks just a few weeks ago.
That's right. Yahya Sinwar was the most senior Hamas prisoner in Israeli prison. He was serving already 22 years in Israeli prison. He had actually never killed an Israeli before he was arrested. He was arrested for killing 4 Palestinians who were suspected of being collaborators with Israel. Israel saved his life when he was in prison. He had brain cancer, and Israel brought him to a hospital. He had surgery. His life was saved by Israel. He went on to be released in the Shalit deal in 2011. And when he left prison, he said that his ultimate goal in life is to free all the prisoners, to empty the Israeli prisons of Palestinian prisoners. This is a speech that he's made in every important speech he's made since 2011, and it is now his goal to fulfill that speech. I don't think he has a partner on the Israeli side for it, although the only way to bring back all the hostages is through what's called the all-for-all deal, all the prisoners for all the hostages. This is not a deal that the government of Israel is prepared to make.
And I suppose the precedent indicates why they don't want to make that. Who are these potentially thousands of Palestinian prisoners that they would release, and what would happen in years to come?
That's right. At least 559 of them are serving life sentences for killing Israelis.
Right.
Another 130 of them are terrorists who were caught inside of Israel after October 7th. There are some very, very dangerous people amongst those that would be released. Releasing them would essentially mean that Israel would pursue them and try to kill them all. And this is something that we don't want to see happen either. We're in a very difficult situation because there is an urgency of getting the hostages home. Women, children, and elderly is apparently what's on the table right now. It has to be a significantly large number of people that Hamas is willing to release in exchange for a ceasefire that would last 3 or 4 or 5 days. And the entrance of a lot more humanitarian aid into Gaza is something that Israel would for sure allow. But Hamas needs to understand that if it wants this humanitarian aid to get into Gaza, if it wants more water, it wants more fuel and food and medical supplies, it has to concede and at least release the women, the children, and the elderly. It's not only the right thing to do, it's within their religion. The Holy Quran specifically says that you don't attack women, children, and elderly. You don't hold them as hostage. This should be part of their fundamental religious beliefs, not only their strategy in fighting a war against Israel.
Let's consider then, Gershon, what we know about the 240 hostages. For example, do we know where they are with certainty?
No, we have no idea where they are.
Okay.
I assume that after 5 weeks of fighting, the Israelis have collected a significant amount of intelligence information. And if there is no deal, if there is no way to negotiate their release, or if only some of them are released, Israel will begin the search and rescue operations by special forces. It is believed that they are all in the southern half of the West Bank, probably most of them in the tunnel network underneath the Gaza, the south of the Gaza Strip. They are probably also in the basement of homes or in buildings anywhere in this very, very densely populated area.
Is there not a risk then with that sort of uncertainty, and indeed a consideration that they might be in such places as you outline, that the bombardment by Israel could be endangering the hostages either directly, as in they may become targets inadvertently, so either directly or indirectly, that actually it would provoke Hamas into killing the hostages as well? Is there any way here that we can say the bombardment by Israel is not endangering the hostages?
No, there's no way that we can say it. The Israeli strategists, the Israeli military, the Minister of Defense keeps saying to the public that the Israeli army moving in and moving down and moving underground is putting more pressure on Hamas to make a deal. This is a guess. More than anything else, as far as I perceive it, we have no way of really knowing if this is what's happening. Is Hamas feeling the pressure and therefore they will be more ready to negotiate? Or are we endangering the lives of the hostages, both from the bombings themselves and perhaps a decision of Hamas to kill hostages simply out of their anger toward the Israeli move toward them, or the recognition that perhaps some of the Hamas leaders are coming through to that their days are numbered. I don't believe that they yet understand that their days are numbered, but they will soon have to come to grips with the reality that this war doesn't have a scenario where it ends with Hamas still in charge of Gaza.
Gershon, thank you very much for your expertise and sharing with us what it's like to actually be behind the scenes, as it were, in these negotiations. Thanks for your time.